Hey, my name is Paige. I am a certified fruitarian nutrition practitioner and a certified personal trainer. And today I'm going to walk you through the 3 steps for reading a nutrition label. That way you are choosing foods that are helping you to burn fat and slim down in the most efficient way possible. First, we're going to walk through the 3 steps, the 3 primary things that you want to look at when you're reading a nutrition label. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to walk you through some examples and my thought process behind reading certain nutrition labels. We'll walk through some foods together, and this just gives you a good idea of the thought process behind it. That way you can be more successful and you can actually choose foods that are helping you in your weight loss journey and not slowing down your progress. So with all that out of the way, let's get to it. The number one first thing to look at when you're reading a food label is the ingredients. If the food has unproductive ingredients, there's no reason to read any further. You can just stop and put that food back on the shelf. So let's talk about the ingredients real quick. What ingredients do you want to be on the lookout for? So it's easier for me to just tell you the unproductive ingredients because I am a big fan of eating a whole food plant-based diet, especially focused around fruit, vegetables, leafy greens, and starchy vegetables. So for the most part, when you're reading a food label, it's easier to have your eye out for the unproductive foods, the things that you really want to watch out for that you don't want to include. So let's talk about those right now. So the first thing you want to look out for is animal products, things like beef, chicken, pork, fish, even your eggs and your dairy. So if the packaged ingredient that you're looking at has any of those items in it, it's probably best just to put that back on the shelf. And the main reason for this is not only have animal products been associated with diseases and illnesses like an increased risk of heart disease, but animal products are also associated with a higher BMI, meaning people who eat more animal products tend to be at a heavier weight. They tend to be overweight or even obese. However, people who focus on plant-based foods are at a healthier weight. So when we take all that into consideration, it's best to just focus on your plant-based foods and just cut out those animal products. And also when we take into account calorie density, a lot of your calorie-dense foods are going to be your animal products. And more of the foods that aren't as calorie dense, you're going to get more bulk to go along with the calories, are going to be your fruits, vegetables, leafy greens, and starchy vegetables. So that's another reason why we want to focus on those foods and not so much the animal products. All right, the next thing you want to look for when it comes to ingredients is gluten. It's best to just cut out the gluten. If you're going to have some sort of a whole grain, it's best to have a gluten-free whole grain. So things like millet, oatmeal, quinoa, it's better to focus on those whole grains than the grains that contain gluten. The next ingredient to look for is oils. Oils are just an empty calorie food. You just don't need them. All that oil is doing is it's just giving you extra calories without giving you any added bulk whatsoever. So if you're trying to slim down and you're trying to lose body fat, that is like your worst enemy. So cut out the oil, get the oil out of there. It's just going to be so much easier to lose fat when you're not including all of that extra oil and all of those extra calories. So if whatever food you're looking at has oil in it, just put it back on the shelf. Another thing that we want to look at is refined sugar. Now, when I'm talking about your refined processed sugar, I'm talking about your white table sugar, high fructose corn syrup. Those types of foods, you want to get that out of your diet. Those foods are very calorie dense. They're not giving you any added bulk to help you feel full, satiated, and satisfied. And on top of that, they're very, very addicting. Adding a lot of refined sugar to your foods just makes you want to eat them more and more and more. It's very hard to stop yourself and listen to your body's natural hunger and fullness cues when you're adding in a lot of that refined processed sugar. Now, I want to be clear here that this does not mean fruit or your vegetables, your leafy greens, your starchy vegetables. That is a whole different thing. Fruit and refined processed sugar are completely in 2 separate categories, right? That's like comparing water from the freshest spring in Colorado to water in the ditch. They're completely different things. So continue to eat your fruits, your vegetables, your leafy greens, and your starchy vegetables and really focus on your whole fresh fruit, but cut out all of that refined processed white table sugar. And the next thing that you want to look for in your ingredients is your refined grains. Things like white flour, white rice. It's really best to just eliminate those and really focus on your gluten-free whole grains. So think oatmeal, millet, quinoa, brown rice, those types of foods. If you're going to have a whole grain, you want to focus on those over your refined grains like white flour and white rice. Now, I will tell you, I still have white rice on occasion. Like if I'm going to go to a restaurant and they don't have brown rice available, I will still have white rice. But I don't have it very often, and honestly, I don't even eat out that much anyway, so it's very far and few between that actually happens. So you just want to do the best with what you have where you are. So if you have a choice between brown rice and white rice, go for the brown rice instead of the white rice. So just always choose your gluten-free whole grains instead instead of your refined grains. So those are the basic ingredients that you want to watch out for when you're reading your packaged food labels. And if the food has any of those ingredients that we've talked about, you might as well just put it back on the shelf. There's no reason to even go any further in this process. However, if the food that you have in your hand does have good ingredients, it doesn't have any of those unproductive foods, then we can move on to step number 2. So step number 2 of reading the food label is looking at the fat grams. That's the next most important thing. And most people make the mistake of wanting to go look at the protein, like, ooh, how much protein does this food have? And the protein should not even be a concern or a worry in your mind. As long as you are eating enough calories from your fruits, your vegetables, your leafy greens, and your starchy vegetables, you are going to get enough protein. You don't have to worry about protein. As long as you're eating enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. The body really only needs about 6 to 10% of overall calories coming from protein. So as long as you're eating enough calories, protein shouldn't even be a second thought in your mind. All right, so the next thing we want to look at is the fat grams. So why do we want to look at the fat grams and why is this important? Well, there's several reasons, but one reason, especially when it comes to weight loss, is fat is very calorie dense. There are 9 calories per gram of fat, whereas there's only 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. So if you're going to be focusing on a lot of fat, you're going to be getting in a lot more calories per gram of that fat, meaning you're not going to get near as much bulk. It's going to be very calorie dense, and it's going to be hard to lose weight, and it's going to be hard to follow your body's natural hunger and fullness cues because fat is very addicting. So fat and sugar are 2 highly addictive things. And when you combine fat and you combine sugar and you combine salt, you've got a very addictive product. And mind you, when I say sugar, I'm talking about your refined sugar again. So keep in mind that when you include a lot of fat, you are just making it harder on yourself to lose weight and slim down because the more fat you include, the more you want to eat, the more you want to keep eating, and the harder it is to stop yourself and actually follow your body's natural hunger and fullness cues. That's one reason. On top of that, fat is just not the body's ideal fuel source. When you eat fat, it's very hard, very stressful on the liver. Fat blocks the glucose from getting into the cells. So when you eat a lot of fat, that's what's causing the diabetes, the insulin resistance, and all of those problems and issues because the sugar in the blood has nowhere to go. So if you cut out the fat, that will help to eliminate those problems. So what do we want to look at when we look at the fat intake? Well, overall, you don't want to have more than 10% of your overall calories coming from fat. So for most people, if you're having about 1,800 calories a day, this is going to come out to about 20 grams of fat. So you don't want to have more than 20 grams of fat a day. And when it comes to reading your food labels, this is when it can get kind of tricky because just because a food is high in fat doesn't mean that you can't include it or can't have it. It just means that you want to be very mindful of it and only eat it in moderation. So typically these are going to be foods that contain your nuts and seeds, your nut butters, any sort of coconut products like coconut milk, coconut cream, avocado, olives, those types of plant-based fats, any sort of food that has that as a main ingredient, or even not even a main ingredient, it could just be an ingredient because fat just adds up so quickly. So if there's any sort of plant-based fat in the food that you're eating, more than likely you just want to make sure that you take note of how many grams of fat is per serving in that food. That way you just have a good idea of how much fat you're having throughout the day. That is the one macronutrient that you do want to be mindful of because it's just so easy to overeat on fat, and fat just adds up very quickly. And the last thing that you want to look at on a food label is the sodium. So I try to stay under about 1,000 milligrams of sodium a day. So this is just something to be mindful of if you are eating a food that has good ingredients and it is low in fat, but yet it's got a lot of sodium. That doesn't mean that you can't have the food, but you want to be mindful of it. It just depends on what the food is. So just be aware. A good example of this is canned soups. So canned soups are notorious for having crazy amounts of salt. So you might have a soup in front of you that's got good ingredients and it is low in fat, but it could have insane amounts of sodium. If that's the case, it would be better for you to just find a lower sodium soup or just make it on your own. So now that we've walked through a brief overview of reading a food label, I'm going to walk you through some examples and some different packaged foods that I have here, just so you can get a clear idea of what it's like to be inside my head whenever I'm grocery shopping and how I analyze the foods that I'm looking at. And analyze sounds like a very scientific word, so don't let that scare you. It's just very simple. I'm just looking at the ingredients, fat, and sodium, and deciding is this a food that I want to include or not. All right, so let's walk through some different packaged foods that I have here. Okay, so here are our packaged foods. So first, I've got a package here of brown rice noodles, and I will put a picture of the nutrition label up on the screen so you can see what I am looking at. So the first thing I'm looking at is the ingredients. I see it's got brown rice flour and water. So we're good here. I love looking at a nutrition label and seeing only like 2 or 3 ingredients. Like, it makes me so happy because I know that whenever I pick up a food and I see like this long paragraph of ingredients, I already have a red flag up and I already kind of know like, okay, this food is more than likely going to have something in it that I don't want to be eating. So whenever I see that the food label only has like a few words, I know that it's going to be like a good, wholesome food for the most part, typically. Not always the case, but it usually is. So brown rice flour, water, so I'm good. I can go on to step 2 because I see here that we have got good ingredients. So the next thing I want to look at is the total grams of fat. And whenever I'm looking at the fat, I also like to take into account the serving size because, yeah, the fat grams might be low, but if the serving size is like super, super small and I end up having like several servings of that food, then it's just going to inch that fat intake up more and more and more. So you just want to be mindful of the servings and the fat per serving, right? And how many servings you plan on eating. I know that kind of seems like common sense, but it can be kind of tricky sometimes because you might think a food is low fat, but it's like for an incredibly small portion, and so then you end up eating like, 10 servings or whatever that food is, and it ends up being a high fat food. So 1 gram of fat, there's 4 servings per container. So like if I were to have half this box, that would only be 2 grams of fat. So that's not bad. That's totally fine, especially if I'm like trying to be under 20 grams of fat for the day. That's a perfect amount. That's totally fine. And then if I look at the sodium, 0 grams of sodium. So this would be a fine food for me to include. Now, I do typically like to focus on my fruits and my starchy vegetables as my primary calorie source rather than a gluten-free whole grain. But this could still be something that I might want to include 1 to 2 times a week or something like that. Next up, I have a package of nori sheets, which is basically like a dried seaweed. So, and you got to be careful with these because a lot of dried seaweeds have oil. So let's see if this one does. So ingredients, I see right off the bat, ingredients, organic roasted seaweed. That's it. There's no oil, there's no salt, there's nothing. Just organic roasted seaweed. So I'm already loving this product, right? Of course I have it. I use this all the time. And then let's look at the fat. 0 grams of fat, so we're good there. Sodium, 0. So this product would be great to use along with sushi or if I just wanted to cut it up in small pieces and eat it as a snack. Next up, I have a can of organic pumpkin. So here I look at the ingredients. Organic pumpkin, again, just a single ingredient, so we're good there. Fat, 0 grams. Sodium, 5, so basically like nothing. So this would be a great product to include. And now I have a can of salsa, and you really got to watch out for salsa because salsa can be very sneaky with the refined sugar and the oil. So you just gotta kind of be aware of those things. This particular brand has tomatoes, okay, onion, jalapeno, lime juice, salt, cilantro, garlic, serrano pepper, cumin, black pepper. So I'm good with this. I don't see any oil. I don't see any added refined sugar. I don't see any MSG or anything like that. So this would be a product that I would include. And I will have to say, unfortunately, this brand of salsa out of Austin actually changed their ingredients recently. So I no longer use this brand of salsa. This was just an old jar that I had in the pantry. Now let's look at this can of refried beans. And you might think, oh, beans, like that's plant-based? Yeah, let's eat that, right? Well, let's check out the ingredients. Cooked beans, okay, we're all right so far. Water, lard, and salt. So that lard right there, immediately I would put this back on the shelf and I wouldn't need to read any further. So you don't have to check out the fat. You don't have to check out the sodium. You don't even need to look at anything else because the ingredients are not the best. So we're going to put that away. And now we have club crackers here. And you probably, if you're in the store and you see a product like this, you don't even need to pick it up because more than likely you already know that it's going to have a refined like white flour in there. But just for the sake of this video, let's say that you wanted to pick this up, check it out. What would the process look like? So in the ingredients, the number 1 ingredient right off the bat, enriched flour. That is a refined grain. You don't need to even read the rest of the ingredients. You don't need to look any further. You can just put this back on the shelf. However, if I were to continue reading, which I wouldn't in most cases, but just to show you what I'm talking about, you can see here that the total fat grams, it does say 3 grams of fat, which is low fat. Like 3 grams is, I would consider that a low fat, but we have to think about how many servings of fat that's for. It's only for 4 crackers. How many people sit down and eat just 4 crackers? I know I wouldn't be able to. Like if I sat down and I ate these crackers, I would probably eat like half the box. So I don't even know how many crackers that would be, but easily I would probably, I don't know, 10 servings maybe. So if you do 10 times 3, that's 30 grams of fat. So now what we thought was a low fat food ended up being a high fat food. So you have to take into consideration when you're looking at the food labels, like even though the product may be low in fat, you have to think about like how many servings of this am I going to eat? Is it going to be an addicting food? Is it going to give me any bulk to help me feel full and satiated and satisfied? Am I going to be able to follow my body's natural and hunger and fullness cues when I eat this food? And typically when a food has a lot of fat, it's just going to be hard to stop yourself because it has that addicting factor, especially when it has fat and salt. Well, I mean, then you have like two addicting factors that are just going to keep you wanting to eat more and more and more. So even though 3 grams of fat is low fat, this is still a high fat food because you are going to end up eating more than just one serving, right? It's going to be an addicting food. It's going to be hard to stop yourself. And before you know it, 3 grams of fat turns into 30 grams of fat. So you just want to be mindful of that when you're looking at these types of products. Okay, Jif peanut butter. So now the first ingredient that I see here is roasted peanuts and sugar. So roasted peanuts, I'm okay with. Sugar, not so much. So you can immediately put this back on the shelf. But if I were to keep reading this, fully hydrogenated vegetable oils. Definitely don't want that in the diet, right? The oils are just empty calories. They're just adding in more calories, not giving you any bulk. It's just an empty calorie food. Why would you want to include that in your diet? You're just making it that much harder for yourself to lose fat and slim down. So this is not something that you want to include. However, if you were to get a healthier version of this, so like just a nut butter just made with just roasted peanuts or just almonds or something like that, so like a much cleaner version of this, even though that's a high fat food, it's not that you can't have that type of food. You just want to have it in very small amounts because you're going to get like, I don't know, 8 grams of fat per tablespoon. That's going to be a high fat food. So you just want to have it in small amounts and just be mindful, measure it out, know how much you're having throughout the day. That way you don't get carried away with having too much. And I just want to put in here that when it comes to the ingredients, this really is a personal choice that you have to make because you can get really strict with this or you can be very lenient with this. It just depends on how much effort you want to put into this because honestly, at the end of the day, you get what you put into it. So however much effort you want to put into it, that's the results you're going to get out of it. So it's a personal choice. You get to decide how strict you want to be with yourself and how far you want to take it, right? But what I've talked about today are just kind of the basics, sort of the main things you want to look for when you're reading a food label and just how you want to go about doing it, especially if you want to lose fat in the most efficient way. If you liked this video, make sure that you click the video on the screen. This is another video that I think you might like, and I'll see you there.